What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 5280 podcast on the MHRT network. I am your host, Mundungus Creevy, alongside my co-hosts, as always, Glenn, Hauser, Cameron Parker, and Gage. I got my shirt on tonight, Madrid. How's it going, everybody?
Going.
Good.
It's going well.
Mike just started impromptu.
I mean, that's what I do. I was hoping that I could catch Glenn still looking for that water bottle and then completely make something up, but
So if I'm breathing heavy, it's not that I'm making phone calls.
He was doing stuff with a water bottle, and that's why he's out of breath.
Again, the first 90 seconds, the context is really lacking.
The most interesting part.
Yeah.
Just let minds wander. It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously, we just had the first game of the season. There are some things that we definitely need to talk about. One of those being whether it was a Bo Nix problem or not a Bo Nix problem. And we will get into that conversation. But the first thing I want to make sure we cover, Glenn sent this out right before we went live, maybe like a half hour ago, something like that. But the Hall of Fame, is it the finalists or the
Senior committee?
Senior committee, okay, has 7 Broncos Ring of Famers up. So we're looking at Lionel Taylor, Rick Upchurch, Rich Jackson, Tom Jackson, Carl Mecklenburg, Dennis Smith, Louis Wright, and then also nominated for the candidate pool is Sammy Winder, Lyle Alzado, I'm not even going to try to say that name. Bob Scarpito, we'll go with that. Yep. And then Michael Dean Perry. Carpaccio. So hopefully we get more Broncos in the Hall of Fame soon.
Yeah, and I maybe to lead it off, I feel like the one that probably would maybe make the most sense based on the fact that he's been probably a semifinalist is Carl Mecklenburg.
I hope so.
I mean, and specifically, you hear us, talk about, with some of these players who are part of an older era of football, but yet if you put them into this current, day of the NFL, they would kind of fit. Right, with where things are based on versatility, and you hear us talk about it with Riley Odom, right? When he was elected to the Broncos Ring of Fame, right? So Mecklenburg was one of those players who, like, based on versatility, you could put him basically anywhere. I mean, he was kind of like the Micah Parsons before Micah Parsons to a certain degree. I mean, like, he was a player you could play, in the middle. He's a player you could play on the outside. I mean, like, he was a very versatile weapon for that, Orange Crush defense. And so I feel like, it would make total sense, for the Hall of Fame to really give him really strong consideration. And obviously he's a Hall of Fame type person too. I mean, he's just a very genuine, human being. And he also makes his opinions very well known about, the current state of the Denver Broncos too.
Yeah, his posts do go a little bit long, but I mean, if you think about it, he was a 12th round pick in the Elway draft, even though the Broncos didn't draft Elway. Don't try to correct me. I but a 12th round pick out of Minnesota. Never thought he was going to make the NFL. He was set to go to med school. And this guy played successfully every position on defense outside of cornerback and safety. I mean, just an unbelievable, dominant player. And it's almost like his versatility has worked against him. I would feel in some ways, because he just does not have the statistics in certain areas because he was bouncing around so much. But this guy really could take over some games on the defensive front. And I would love to see him get some momentum to get into the Hall of Fame. Another player that was on that list is Louis Wright. He's considered one of the original shutdown corners in the NFL. Was playing on he's like all decade team in the 70s when the Steelers had top players, when the Cowboys had the star players on defense, and Louis Wright was still an all decade player, and he's worth consideration as well. It is harder the more further off we get off for their retirement, but it's nice. I'm a big fan of the senior committee because it gives some recognition to some of these guys, and at least if they don't make it in, at least some of the people start talking about their impact, in the NFL.
Yeah. All right. So fun times ahead for talking about this stupid game we just had on Sunday. I do want to talk about some good things, and I'm going to start with the defense, and you guys can add in whatever other points you have. These are just some kind of things that I've, like Mario had some posts that I saved and went over, and Bree had some guys from LTV. So I was just kind of going through and picking out the things that they saw that were good, the things that I thought were good, and we'll just kind of go from there. Number one, Pat Surtain, definitely worth the contract extension. Like, he shut down DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
There was like that one penalty, and then other than that, it was done.
Mm-hmm.
He shut down DK Metcalf and Robbie NFL all in the span of 3 days.
That was funny.
That was great, man.
And then opposite of Pat Surtain, you had Riley Moss. I thought he looked really good.
Yep.
I think that two of the catches that people were upset about were just really great throws. There wasn't any better coverage he could have had on it. It was just a good throw and a great catch. There was one or two where it was like, okay, well, he was behind or he missed. But for the most part, I definitely think he showed that he was CB2.
Yep. You won't get any I don't think you will get any pushback from me. And I think that the biggest thing to use a paraphrase, on it was like a carbon copy, of, some of the last 8 years, and it's just been that the defense was just gassed, and the defense got gassed. And I think that, you saw how actually really good this run defense actually has the chance to be if it's not gassed. And, there's some results to that. I'm actually surprised you didn't talk about the other player who maybe had the best game of anybody on that defense, including Pat Surtain, and that's Jonathan Cooper. Jonathan
didn't get there yet.
Yeah.
We're 7 minutes in.
Failed us, Mike.
What do you mean?
You're supposed to be the one who keeps us on the rails, not take us off the rails.
I kept it on. Cam took us off.
But no, Jonathan Cooper was.
I should call him Cam Track. Really.
Cooper was incredible. I mean, I think ESPN had had a stat that even came out today or late yesterday that had it as Cooper having the best pass rush win rate out of anybody from week one. And that is, specifically, for all the talk about the Broncos pass rush and everything, like it's definitely one where, those are the type of things that you want to keep track of. I mean, Benito looked great, except for the questionable roughing the passer penalty. Browning even looked amazing. So, the pass rush in general was about everything that you would have hoped for. And, in large part because the interior defensive, front was getting home all day. I mean, don't let Pro Football Focus's weird, grading system fool you. Zach Allen was fantastic. Zach Allen was fantastic. It actually felt very much, before Seattle broke it open, it felt very much like an Iowa Hawkeyes game. Like, it was a defensive battle. You actually had two safeties in the game. I literally turned to my dad, and I think some of his buddies even texted him in their group chat and said, this literally feels like an Iowa Hawkeyes game with the two safeties and, and them not even being able to move the ball from Geno and our offensive side of things. Like, it was a true NFC West game for like majority of the game before the floodgates open.
It was like an Iowa game, but ended like a Colorado game.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're welcome, gentlemen. Obviously, massive improvement on the pass rush between last season, this season. Well, at least for this game. And I don't know how bad the Seahawks offensive line is. I don't care. I'm not a Seahawks fan. Don't give a crap. I'm just saying the defensive line looked much improved. Like Cam said, with Benito and Browning. We even had a couple of encroachments or false starts, shall we say. I mean, that's on offense, but encroachments because of, what does that beep?
It's when you jump off sides and touch an opponent.
No, I meant, what is that beeping sound? Is that what you were looking at? Because I
Oh,
keep
that
hearing beep. Is that me? It's
I
not
thought you
me.
were like, what does that mean?
Maybe
I was like-
somebody's fire alarm's going off. Ow, smoke detector, whatever.
I was
Mike's
like,
convenience,
Dora the
Mike's
Explorer
convenience
thing
store
with
burrito is
Nickelodeon.
done in the microwave.
I straight up just went squirrel. No, but the
That's
pass rush
been
was,
clipped.
yeah, squirrel. The pass rush was definitely a lot better. But one of the things I think one of the biggest bright spots of the entire game was the defense. Even in the second half, yeah, they got tired. They wore down. They were able to start getting runs. They were able to start completing passes. But that's because the defense has been on the field for so long. And I feel like we've said this the last 3 seasons. The defense was on the field for so long that they wore down, and the Seahawks were able to move the ball.
Yep. And I also feel like the edge rushers were able to really exploit a paper-thin right side of that Seahawks offensive line. Like when Stone Forsythe was in there, it was basically like Geno Smith was getting a free rusher in his face every single time. Nick Bonito beat Stone Forsythe clean off the line. I want to say that Jonathan Cooper did as well. It was absolutely ugly, but at the same time, you would expect an improved Broncos defensive line to feast on a paper-thin Seahawks offensive line, and they rose to task. In the first half, they really shut down the run game. In the second half, they did spring a couple of exotic traps on the defensive line that kind of caught a couple of guys out of position. One of them was John Franklin Myers. I believe that one was Kenneth Walker's touchdown run, plus a couple of missed tackles from Riley Moss and Alex Singleton. That doesn't help matters. But at the end of the day, the defense showed they were a lot more disciplined up front. They were playing a lot more physical and aggressive. I also want to touch on Geno Smith's 34-yard touchdown run. That one was on a 6-man blitz, man coverage play where the Broncos essentially gave up a rushing hole. And I'd rather have that happen than play soft, squishy zone coverage, give wide receivers free releases off the line of scrimmage, and let them pick you apart underneath. You're not exactly thinking of Geno Smith as the most mobile quarterback in the world. You're not always going to have a spy on him. So that was just a situation where the Broncos got. I saw quite a few people on Twitter being like, how'd you give up a 34-yard touchdown run to Geno Smith? That's what happens when you play more man coverage. And we may see that a few more times this year. But again, I'd rather that happen than what happened down in Miami or in Detroit, where they just got killed by 1,000 paper cuts.
And real quick on Bowles, last I checked, it was a bone bruise on the ankle, and he will be fine this weekend.
And obviously that all reports were negative. Like, it was all across the board. The MRIs and everything came across as negative. Yeah. They need him for sure.
And to go along with Gage's shout out, how about we shout out Alex Singleton for getting a pick six on the second play of the game?
No, just a pick, not a pick six.
No, it's a pick six in my mind. I don't care what anybody else says. It's a pick six in my mind.
Well, we won't let the facts get in the way. So
27-26 was the end score of the game. Broncos won.
I know. It was a great start to the game. Unfortunately, so we had the interception, Singleton with the great run back, Javonte with the 9-yard play. So 2nd and 1, and they couldn't convert. Ended up getting a field goal rather than a touchdown. It was still an exciting start, but that was kind of a disappointing missed opportunity right off the bat when the momentum was fully in the Broncos' corner at that time.
Yeah. It would also be congratulations to Mike too. I mean, since Mike is
basically congrats to all of Nebraska. We can win and the Buffs can't. I'm sorry. Okay. So moving on to, let's go to the offensive side of the ball. Which was the fun one, right? They could not establish a run game at all. Like, I think it was 19 runs to 47 passes or something like that. It was insane.
Yeah. I will start it off with this, and specifically the running game. I want to know what happened to Javonte. because I mean, they couldn't establish the running game, but the one who really looked the best, even though he slipped and everything, was Javonte. And you hate to use it, as a detriment, but it was almost like the moment he slipped was also the moment that his carries dropped, and that's not Javonte's fault. That was the field's fault, and he just slipped. And he was definitely the best out of that entire bunch. I mean, he looked everything that we had been reporting, with training camp and even OTAs. Like, he looked fast, he looked quick. And I just think that, it was a bit disappointing just overall. And Jaleel was probably the most disappointing of anyone, on Sunday with the running backs. Now, granted, the fumble and everything I thought had more to do with the phenomenal play by the Seattle defense. But from the running game side of things, it was pretty disappointing. And I'm not going to pin too much on Audric Estime's hurdle, because that was kind of like another one of those plays where it's like he hurdled a guy, and then another great play to, knock the ball out by the Seattle defender. I mean, you may not want to see that from a rookie, but like I think you got a sense that Estime actually has some athleticism to him. I think that's probably the biggest thing that you can probably say. But overall, though, I was a bit disappointed. You were running in the inside, you were running on the outside. The lack of Javonte was a bit confusing. It was just a bit of a frustrating game from the rushing side of things.
Yeah, for sure. And I also felt like the screen game was quite disappointing. We saw a lot of swing passes to Jaleel. It felt like Sean was trying to utilize Jaleel in like a Darren Sproles, Pierre Thomas, Alvin Kamara type role. And Jaleel is just not that player at the end of the day. We can sit here and try to pump up what Jaleel does well. And I think he's a good, actually, between the tackles runner. He's got good vision. All he needs is a crease and he's gone. But trying to get him the ball in the receiving game and the perimeter might not be his game. I'm almost wondering if maybe Blake Watson should be activated on game day to see what he can do in that role. Maybe he can make more guys miss in open space. It's just a thought, man. And I'm saying that as somebody who loves what Jaleel does bring to the table, but this just isn't it. I felt like Sean did not put several players in position to be successful. And that starts with Bo Nix. I understand the game plan probably wasn't to throw the ball 42 times, but by that same token, you abandoned the run game at various points throughout the game where you should have stuck to it because it was working. And then also, we saw like no designed runs from Bo Nix. We saw no read options. We saw no quarterback draw, QB power, stuff that Bo Nix can 100% execute. To me, it felt like Sean Payton was calling an offense for Russell Wilson on Sunday, not Bo Nix.
That hurts. What you're saying, the O-line wasn't good. I wouldn't say that. The offensive line, I thought, gave Nix a pretty good pocket for most of the game. He was either able to escape or move up in the pocket. He took what, 1 sack, 2 sacks?
Yeah. I don't think
it was horrible. I think that when you're looking at the failure in the run game, a lot of it was, again, the McLaughlin outside screens, those outside passes. It looked like Javonte just didn't have any vision anymore, didn't know where the hole was. I don't know what the problem was. I don't think the offensive line was bad, but
I don't think they were great either. Like, I thought the protection was subpar, especially coming out of halftime. That sequence was frustrating as hell. You come out, it's a swing, it's a toss actually to Jaleel for a 4-yard loss. Second play, drop back pass, the protection breaks down. Bo has no time. He's got to get rid of it. Then communication issues. You get a false start. It's 3rd and 19, screen for 1 yard, and you're punting. And it wasn't even a great punt after that. That was just a frustrating sequence. And that was where you could really point to some of those errors on that side of the field, especially.
Well, and I was going to say statistically, if you actually look at it, the Broncos were one of the more pressured teams by the offensive on the offensive line. Like it was, I think it was the 33 or the 33rd team that put out a stat that said that the Broncos were like in the top 3 or top 2 in terms of, they were, generating the most pressure from, or allowing the most pressure by the offensive line. I mean, it was. You talked about, was it you, Mike, you mentioned, or no, it was Gage. You mentioned, it looked like you an offense for Russell Wilson out there. Well, I mean, the only thing that was different there was Bo was actually escaping the sacks, everything that Russ couldn't do. So just kind of picture for a second about how bad it would have been if Russ was the quarterback for something like that. We would never have been able to produce 20 points. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, it just goes to show you how bad it was. And I think that, I think that for me, the offensive line really wasn't great. And I think that that's also a tribute to the defensive line. Everything that we have been talking about, either, here or, or even, when I've been on mainly Broncos, it's just like the fact that, like, the defensive front of Seattle has been a big concern heading up into this game. And I think that for this, it was a disaster. It was a disaster. They unfortunately were not living up to its standard that we've come to see. And I mean, Bowles was honestly the best player who I thought was, even better between the two was actually Mike McGlinchey. Like, I thought Mike McGlinchey had a much better game than Garrett Bowles. I mean, Garrett Bowles wasn't great at all. Quinn Miners, I thought, was a bit shaky. And if you were probably saying who was the best of the bunch, Luke Wattenberg, I thought was actually the best of the bunch. So I just think that, like, overall, it was just a bit frustrating. And then I mean, just, real quick, like, I was definitely confused about the lack of running game and the lack of usage, with Bo Nix and, his running ability. I mean, the stuff that the Gage talked about. I mean, it was very frustrating because it's like, you call what felt like a very conservative game plan. And I think that for Bo Nix, I mean, like, yeah, he wasn't helping matters on some of his throws when they were going conservative. And that's to be expected with a rookie. But you go across the National Football League, he wasn't across the National Football League, and that goes even beyond rookies. He wasn't the only quarterback to struggle on the weekend. I mean, you had Caleb Williams, you had Jaden Daniels, you had even Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, who they will be, facing on, Sunday. I mean, like, guys like that who have been struggling and are supposed veterans, you know what I mean, that were struggling. And I think that for this, like, one of the areas where I think that you really get a chance to see the improvement was you did get a chance to see him go, like, all right, we'll get this done throughout the game. And that's everything that we've been seeing, and that it's been preached, is just that, it's been better from Bo, like, from quarter to quarter. I think it was Ryan Michael, who does the stuff for 850K away, that said that in every single quarter, Bo statistically got better with his completion and attempts, from the first to the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like, it was impressive in a standpoint that you actually saw him get better. And I don't know if you guys actually saw this crazy statistic that Andrew Mason put out, but it said that I won't actually say what it was, but it was comparative to his first start at Oregon. His first start at Oregon, where he played Georgia. He was very rough when he was playing Georgia. And it was almost identical to his statistic, where he played the Seattle Seahawks. But it was after that was when he actually looked like one of the best quarterbacks in college football.
And, I saw Graham reference that he has some wheels, and on that run down the left sideline, he actually was the second fastest play in the NFL last weekend, and it comes from our new quarterback. Again, you mentioned Russ W. He could not have pulled something like that off. But one thing about Bo that, even though he threw a couple picks and we're not used to seeing him do that, at least not in recent years, is that the game didn't look too big for him. Like, he didn't look like to me, he didn't look nervous. He didn't look rattled. it was just one of those things. And, it's his first game, but he didn't look like he was just collapsing under the pressure. And I think that's a good takeaway, at least for me, moving forward, that's one thing we don't need to worry about, is that the guy doesn't, does not fold under pressure.
I think I think for me, though, as I will say, there were moments where you could just tell, specifically from the first quarter, second quarter, and some of the third, like he was nervous, like the nerves were catching in. But despite all of those nerves, he was able to get it within, get it controlled a little bit, and actually have a close game. And I think that that's the part of it that I think that is so impressive, is that despite all of his nerves, he was able to rally those troops around and, actually, have some confidence going into the next week. And, it's also to tie a bow on everything. Like, it's really important that we also preface this for like every single game this year. And, we made our record predictions, but everything for this year hinges on the growth of Bo Nix. If Bo Nix grows and matures from week 1 to week 17 and becomes that guy, at the end of the day, records and whatever, it really doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway for Bo is to figure out what his limitations are. Like, he had 60-something starts in college. He figured it out in college, but now he's in the NFL. He's facing the best of the best. He's got to figure out what his limitations are, because he can't do the same thing right away against NFL players as he did in college. Like, he's got to figure out when not to throw into coverage and how much force he needs to put on the ball. Like, you look at that first interception he had when he was throwing to Sutton, he just didn't throw it far enough. Like, Sutton was behind the coverage and could have caught the ball. He just didn't throw it far enough. So he's just got to be able to figure out what his limitations are.
Looking at that play on the all-22, you could see Sutton coming open. You could see what Bo was thinking there. But what he's got to realize in the NFL is that safeties are all over that stuff like flies on shit, man. Yeah. They really are. They will undercut it. They will drive on the ball, and that's exactly what Julian Love did. He read his eyes and picked it off. Plus, Bo kind of yucking it up with a man in his face off of his back foot didn't help. But I can see why Bo would have tried to make that throw, because that's probably a touchdown in college. But in the NFL, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be an interception. That was the first play I thought of when you brought up, Mike, that he needs to know when he can and can't make certain throws, because there are certain throws that NFL DBs are going to read and they are going to pick off. And I think that the second interception where he kind of chucked it into a Seahawks team meeting, that was another one. And then another one where he threw a near interception over the middle where he didn't see the underneath hook defender. Yep. Those are all ones where you can look on film, realize that, okay, these are throws that I can't make at the NFL level, or this is the decision that I need to make in this given scenario, and improve off of it. That's what we need to see heading into next week. I imagine that there will still be mistakes against the Steelers. Absolutely. But it's all about not making the same mistake twice and learning from those mistakes. Yeah. That's why I had the Broncos starting off with kind of a shaky record in my record predictions and then getting the wins later on, because this team needs to learn how to win football games. I think the defensive side of the ball is very encouraging, but it's clear that the offense is still young and has a long ways to go. And I think we also need to address the elephant in the room here, and that's the wide receiver play.
Mm-hmm. I got something for that.
Absolute booty cheeks. That is the one, man. That sums it up pretty much perfectly. Guys were not getting open. Guys were slipping. Guys were running bad routes. No yards after the catch to speak of. It's clear Denver still doesn't have a number one receiver. And with some of the issues that our young vertical threats with Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims are having, Troy Franklin, still young, still raw. The team kind of wants to be a little more cautious and conservative. And then with Marvin Mims, it just feels like the team doesn't trust him. I don't know why. Maybe it's something in the classroom. Maybe it's route running, stuff like that. I don't know. But Marvin Mims has definitely been disappointing, and the fact that he only ran 6 routes on Sunday is a big indicator of that. So the Broncos receiving core right now has got some big problems.
Yeah.
And what's crazy, though,
hold on, Jay, I will get your report card question. I promise.
I was going to say, what's crazy about that is that the one the one position group that we all were talking about that had the most depth, and that was what Peyton was asked about throughout training camp, was the wide receiver room, had the most depth. It was going to be the hardest cuts to make. And here we are after week 1 with no separation, no burst, the drop passes, the coach having to go over on the sideline and saying, can we make a catch and give this guy, help this guy out, please? And now we have tryouts for 4 or 5 receivers just today, going into week 2. Well, I mean, I did not, to quote Cam, like he likes to say, I did not have that on my bingo card, quite honestly. It's disappointing. And Cortland looked just old out there. I don't know what was going on there, but he did not look like there was no clear wide receiver 1 out there.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say was like this is like your worst nightmare come true, right? Like we just gave Cortland Sutton an extension and some more money. Not really an extension, but we gave him more money.
The opportunity to earn more money.
And he didn't do anything. Like no separation. He had a couple drops. Like I will say this, Josh Reynolds started out rough, but he ended the game better. And Devon Vele, to me, needs to move up the depth chart.
What you could call the thing that's crazy is you could call that a week 1 overreaction, but it's kind of true. I mean, like Devon Vele had himself a game, and I think that maybe to bring up a player that was mentioned in specific, when Gage was talking about the running back room, that may be worth monitoring here. Blake Watson. I think it's worth monitoring specifically with the wide receiver running back room is Blake Watson. If they aren't really trusting any of the, some of the players who, is, really about speed, Watson is certainly one of those players. And I think that, and I saw that Graham mentioned about like, what's the over under with receptions with Franklin. I think that, it will bear watching. I mean, typically he redshirts his players, but if there's one thing that I think could significantly help Bo, it might be one of the biggest things or the biggest thing is the familiarity they both have with one another. And if you really want to really make him comfortable, in weeks and weeks, go on, it's one of the reasons why I tweeted it today, it's just like, I'm very curious to see how will that unfold because everything we've been said in training camp and OTAs, the route running is not where it needs to be. The drops are certainly not where it needs to be. But if they trust him within that, they're going to actually play him from like the midseason on. I mean, like they need to consider that because if the team really needs juice and they really need a player that is going to help take the top off of it, like Franklin might actually end up being that guy. And I think it's also worth noting that Sutton did have a good season in terms of with Russell Wilson as being the only option for Russell Wilson. We should also clarify that he did have a very rough week 1. If anybody remembers that, like he did have kind of a bit of a rough week 1, when they played against the Raiders, and he stepped up the following game. And I imagine Russell Wilson or no Russell Wilson, he'll probably play a little bit better. But I just think that overall, the elephant in the room, it was a very big thing, which was that wide receiver room and the lack of a true number 1 in that room. But also, too, you do have to kind of tip your cap, if you will, to the Seattle Seahawks defense because every single time the Broncos, what felt like they were going to be getting yak, they were stopped immediately. So the moment they caught the ball was the moment that they had a defender breathing down their neck. So they definitely were getting their yak. They weren't definitely getting their yards after catch, but the Seahawks weren't making it easy at all. And the 2 players that they missed desperately, as crazy as it sounds, specifically with week 1, Tim Patrick and Jerry Jeudy. Those were the 2 players they probably could have used. in this game. Yes, I did say Jerry Jeudy. They probably could have used him with his separation and the ability to make people miss.
He scored
Even
a touchdown, by the way.
Well, but also the funny part is you have Jerry Jeudy that went to the Browns and he was wide open for like half the game. Deshaun Watson didn't even see him. So you went to another one. I do have the breakdowns here though for how many snaps, like the percentages that people were on the field. Cortland Sutton obviously was the number one wide receiver. He was 91% of the time he was on the field. Josh Reynolds was 80% with 55. And then after that, Devon Vele was actually third. As far as wide receivers go, at about 49%.
He earned that.
Yeah, Marvin Mims, 17%. So just not good. Lil Jordan Humphrey, another one that I was very upset at during the game. He did not look good. He did not catch well. I'm a little upset that it was. I mean, again, I don't know what's going on with Marvin Mims, but I would have rather seen Mims instead of Lil Jordan Humphrey at that point.
Yeah. Well, and also too, I thought in terms of the catches and the yards after, I'm not trying to pin it too much on Greg Dulcich, but the one area where I thought that Greg Dulcich could have been better, and specifically on one of the plays that actually got highlighted by Tim Jenkins. And if you guys haven't seen that video, please go check it out. It's actually well worth your watch for 30 minutes. Was a play where he had a free rusher, if you will. Knicks had a free rusher in his face because Dulcich did just a disgusting job of chipping Boy Mafe, and he's got to do a much better job of that. And it's one of the big issues that we even had coming into the season was Greg Dulcich is a great playmaker with the ball in his hands. But in order to help make some of those plays happen, you've got to be able to chip people at the line of scrimmage. You've got to be able to chip those pass rushers. And he basically was, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Like he was like, he did it, but he was far less, convincing with how he was wanting to operate that. And because of that, he couldn't even get the ball on possibly a really nice little opportunity for him. So, the tight end room in general too was just left a lot to be desired.
And I did have a question for you. I know that we've kind of talked about the receivers, we talked about the offensive line, the running backs, we talked about Bo Nix. Was the play calling and Sean Payton a problem in this game?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And the now I lost the word. The game plan in general, I didn't think was great.
Yeah, I mean it's still confusing about just abandoning the run game completely. He was asked, were you expecting or did you want Bo to throw 43 times? He goes, heck no. Well,
then why'd
you run him?
You're the guy. You're the guy.
Yeah. And even if he even if he said that, it's like, well, maybe use some designed runs too. You know what I mean? And maybe he was just a bit, standoff in a sense that he didn't want to do that in week 1, which that's okay. But like sometimes you got to expedite the process. Sometimes you got to, do things to get it going. Specifically, obviously, once you're in the regular season. And so I think that it was a bit concerning a little bit that they decided not to use his legs on some of those design runs, especially when you got a chance to see, how explosive he actually is. So Denver's not really had a quarterback like this, as explosive as he is with his legs since darn near Tim Tebow. Like, I just say it for what it is. I mean, like, he's an explosive runner with his legs. And so I think that, when you have the ability to do something like that, I think that it's a very valuable weapon, and it's going to help out your running game no matter what, specifically if it's been struggling. So, yeah, and maybe this is one where we're looking at it a little bit wrong, and we're saying, maybe there won't be a 1,000-yard rusher. Well, maybe there won't be a 1,000-yard rusher because it's going to be pretty well balanced by the end of the year because they are using Bo Nix a little bit more in the running game. Maybe not so much like Lamar Jackson, but just it's going to be a little bit more balanced in the running game from Bo.
Yeah.
Yep.
And listen, I'm not sitting here saying that we know more about football and the game plan in the Broncos than Sean Payton does. That's not what I'm saying. But from the outside point of view, what in God's name what's going it doesn't make any sense. And I think the most disappointing thing about the whole game was that it wasn't Bo. Like Bo was fine. There were some rookie mistakes. There were some decision-making things that were like, what is going on? But at the same time, he wouldn't have been in those situations if it weren't for a lot of teammates letting him down in other areas.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's like
But
there were some things Bo could have personally
Yeah.
done to make life easier on himself.
Yeah.
I feel like he didn't set his feet and he sailed a couple of passes as a result. One of
Mhm.
them, I think Sean Payton alluded to this. He took a 3 hitch instead of a 5 hitch on his drop back, and it resulted to him basically setting down and throwing off of or throwing flat-footed, and it caused inaccuracy. You could tell he wasn't driving the ball with his hips like you really should. It's all about throwing with your lower body and your core just as much as it is with your actual arm. And there are times where I don't see Bo drive the ball with his lower body, and that is a problem for me. I think he probably, after this season, could use a visit with Jordan Palmer to get some of his fundamentals right.
Yeah. Or any, quarterback coach for that matter. I mean, you got Tim Jenkins right across the street. So, I mean, yeah, it probably wouldn't hurt.
okay, so I want to ask you about Sports Nonsense and Whiskey says he blames Sean Payton and VJ for not making adjustments. Why is everybody going after VJ? Like I thought the defense was fine. They were just exhausted because they were on the field for so long.
I mean, on the surface, if you're going to call a spade and you're going to look at the entire game, it did look like they weren't really adjusting, well with the second half. And, and I think that that's at least okay. And that's at least, admirable to say. I just think there was a reason why, and it was just because the defense was gassed. But I still think it's fair to say, that VJ should be, criticized a little bit for a game plan, in the sense of specifically, when you get Kenneth Walker, having free runs and free rushes, in the second half. And it's just like, what's going on? It's like the floodgates just, open, or the dam just broke. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's still a fair objective take. You know what I mean? But I think that when you kind of peel back the layers a little bit, it's understandable about the reason why they were, and it was just because that they were gassed.
And also,
if you really
Seattle started to kind of settle down a little bit with what they were doing. They were starting to get a little bit more down to the basics in the run game, just basic like trap, pulling guards, not trying to get out to the perimeter and do things overly cute like they were in the first half. I thought Ryan Grubb really got better calling the game, the Seahawks offensive coordinator, as the game went on. And Vance didn't really make many adjustments, but by that same token, he was still trying to play physical tight to the line, but a couple of those runs just got you. And then once that happened, he did back off a little bit because guys were out of breath. You couldn't really trust a guy to hold up in man coverage. You couldn't really trust a D lineman to win one-on-one. So that's when I saw him kind of back up and play lighter fronts, play softer zone, and Seattle got some completions as a result. And then afterwards, I thought that they were on that final drive getting back to like their physical man coverage route. So it was really just those couple of drives there where things kind of went south defensively that you could kind of pinpoint for Vance.
Yeah.
So we spent all this time actually like talking about the shortcomings and where things did not go right and the mistakes that were made and the inefficiencies and the ineffectiveness. And we still only lost by 6 points at a very tough place to play. Gage, you had called your prediction last week perfectly. You referenced that this defense under this new coach was going to be very, very strong. And sure enough, you hit the nail on the head. But I feel like we can still walk away with the fact that we stayed in the game. We still fought to the end. We were on the road. It wasn't a game that we were generally supposed to win. this probably hurts my 12-5 prediction a little bit, but so. But what are your guys' takeaways as far as anything like positive that came from the game? Like what are the main things that stand out for you?
Well, I think number one is that all the problems we saw with Bo are fixable. Like those are things that he's going to be able to fix through experience and time on the field. I think the offensive line I know they were on the field last year, but I think they just need a little bit more time to gel, and then they should be good to go. But defensive wise, I think we're looking great. I think the defense is going to carry this team again, and I think that Bo is going to be able to improve enough that we're not having 3 and outs, 6 drives in a row.
Right.
So I just think that, for me too, is like, I just think that for the team, like, I do think Bo's going to get better. I also think the defense is going to be everything we see, maybe not as gassed as much. But I just think, and I also think too, let's pump the brakes now about, this whole, I saw someone post something about, Travis Hunter already, and, it's like, let's pump the brakes on this, because it's like, it was week 1, we don't need to start this. We don't need to start this just now.
There were some people calling
6% of the season is over.
Right. So the fact is
Zach Wilson.
Yeah. So So I think the fact is like, I still do not think that the Broncos are going to be, in that conversation, that means the Broncos are going to be a 3 to 5 win football team. That's not going to happen. So I just think that and to Mike's point, it is all fixable, specifically from Bo's standpoint. And even then, the defensive part of it is a bit fixable. I think that, if there's really one area where I felt like it's a bit of a liability right now coming off of week 1 defensively, I've got to say it's the linebacker room. The linebacker room left a lot to be desired. And when I'm saying the linebacker room, I mean Cody Barton, but specifically Alex Singleton. Singleton was really disappointing after that game. He was actually in my top 3 most disappointing players coming out of that game. I mean, they can pinpoint, maybe a play for Riley Moss about how well or how bad the coverage was. Well, Singleton was really late on that, on the responsibility, and he was the responsible one. And he was really late on that play where, what was it, Charbonnet, who had the free lane right into the touchdown. Yeah. So
and Singleton came running off like hands in the air, like, what happened? And that's why I was wondering, like, did the safety not come down? Like, who was the responsible party on that one?
Yeah, so I think it was strictly Singleton, because they really had a really nice look at it too with the aerial shot on the highlight. You actually got a chance to see maybe Singleton actually following him a little bit, and then kind of for some reason stopped. So he was a liability on week 1. I hope that's not a sign of things to come. But I also think it shows a little bit of a miscoming for Singleton, in the sense that, he's not as great of a coverage linebacker, than any of us really, were hoping for. And so maybe that's going to allow, Bailey to be promoted from the practice squad, or, we get a little bit of some more run with, some of these other players. Maybe that's going to end up being Barton's responsibility. Or maybe that's also, to another point, that's the adjustment with Vance Joseph, right? Unfortunately, putting, Singleton in a situation he should never have been in.
Yeah. I do want to reference something that Joe mentioned in the first half of his comment, that we did have a chance to win. We were going to get the ball back. And Baron Browning, I know he wanted to get an early start on the quarterback, and unfortunately he did. Cost us 5 yards, and then it was a much easier. In fact, that play that ended up happening when he jumped off sides, they did not convert on 3rd down. Yeah. We would have gotten the punt. And who knows what would have happened at that point. Down by 6, no timeouts, however, but, then we're left with a 3rd and 6 at that point. And, people were on Riley Moss, but he gave very good coverage on that play. That was a great pass to Lockett. I don't see how he could have defended that any better. And it was lasered right in there, threaded right in there, and they got the first down. Game over. It was just, you can't have these plays. You know what? I know you want to get to make the big play and sack the quarterback, but you can't be reckless and not give your team a chance. I mean, they pissed away that opportunity. I mean, it's so much better to have a chance at the end, and we didn't even see what could have happened.
It's the classic one. Watch the ball. Don't listen to the quarterback. And
Right.
you've got to stay disciplined in those situations if you're Baron Browning. And again, I understand you're trying to get that advantage on the snap count and you're trying to get that advantage on your rush, but you've got to stay disciplined. You can't jump offside in that situation. And with Riley Moss on that pass, again, it was perfect coverage. It's not easy on a DB having to trail on a crossing route and man coverage like that. And Gino led Tyler Lockett to where he could essentially just put his foot in the ground, accelerate forward, and there's really nothing that Riley can do about it, just running straight on like that. It was just a perfect communicative play between Geno Smith and Tyler Lockett. And same thing with the other completions that Riley gave up. It was 2 back shoulder fades where the timing and the communication between Geno and Lockett were just pinpoint right where it needed to be. So I feel like Riley Moss really held his own out there and played about as well as you could ask for a guy who, for all intents and purposes, is a rookie.
Yeah. So I
So
wanted
that
to go
what-
back to
Yeah,
well, and I had promised Jay would go back to this question.
for
And
sure.
since we're already talking about Riley Moss, we might as well go ahead and just give a report card on Riley Moss. Like I'm going with the B. I'm not doing pluses, minuses. I'm just going B.
I'm going B as well, but I actually am a bit more praiseworthy. I will actually say a B plus. I will actually say a B plus for Riley. I think the one thing,
B
you know,
plus
in
and a
this,
half.
I think that, you know, the one thing that is a nice little callback was, you know, this isn't the first time, you know, that he was actually thrusted into a really hard situation. You know, if you remember back in college, you know, he was thrust into a game, I think it was against Minnesota, where he was, you know, tasked with covering their number 1 wide receiver, and he did it the entire game. And I think he had 2 interceptions in the game. So he's not afraid of the big moment. You know what I mean? I think that, you know, he's not afraid of the big moment. And I think that, you know, people make such a big deal about, you know, being, you know, the first white quarterback in a long time. But I think that the reason why I think that the B plus for me is the grade is like, he proved that he belongs. Like, I think that, like, specifically with week 1, he belongs. And I think that, you know, going forward, week by week by week, I really want to know if Abrams Drain is going to end up being a healthy scratch week by week by week. I think that they probably could have used him specifically in this game. And I was a bit surprised. This is a very separate point with Riley, but I was a bit surprised that they decided to, you know, have him be inactive for that game.
Gage, what you got?
Well, I would definitely say that Riley Moss did what he had to do in that game. Like I said earlier, a lot of those completions were just really well-timed throws by Geno and Tyler Lockett. So I would also say B plus. He had maybe 1 reception that he gave up that I would put on him, but outside of that, at first glance, watching the broadcast footage, I was kind of like, but looking at the tape, seeing the all 22, he
Was
locked
way-
up Tyler Lockett for most of that game.
Yeah, I'll give him an 8.7. You know, all right, B plus. Why not? You know, Cam's talking about him essentially being a rookie. I mean, there was a lot of eyes and scrutiny on him last year, particularly because the Broncos gave up a 3rd-round pick to move up to get him. And so when he was not contributing on the defensive side and only really on special teams, you know, there were a lot of expectations going into the season, and the pressure was really on him in this game. And the man delivered. I thought he did great, and I'm excited to see how he progresses going forward. But I mean, what else could we have asked for? And you had Pat Surtain on one side shutting things down, and so there's a lot of attention on Riley, and he did a great job. I'm really anxious to see how he grows as a cornerback this year.
And I think too, the other layer of Riley that I thought was, it's not surprising to me, based on all the games that I've been able to see with Iowa, but specifically in a game where you want to really make your presence known, and you want to make your presence known in your first game as a cornerback, if you will. I thought he was a very physical corner. So much so that you saw his presence in the running game. The tackle that he made, I believe, was on Charbonnet, or maybe it was Kenneth Walker, but it was a very physical tackle. It was a crocodile. Bree mentioned it was like a crocodile, rep tackle, basically. It was a very physical tackle. And I think that that's specifically for week one. That's the type of thing that can give you confidence, even as a person in coverage, because you made a big play and that you belong. So every single play starts to slow down for you each play and so on and so forth. So it's just, the biggest thing is, again, he just belonged, and he played such a physical brand of football that it probably felt like he was, back in, Iowa again. I think that, to talk about the other part of it is, you actually could not have asked for a better statement for Jim Leonhard also, with the way that secondary played.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. So I think it's pretty safe to sum up the Broncos and Seahawks game with disappointing because the Broncos struggled in areas that we didn't think that they would struggle in.
Mhm.
So going on that premise, let's look forward to the Steelers game. Now, obviously, we don't get to exact some revenge upon Mr. Stupid Russell Wilson Limited.
Careful though, it's spicy.
Because he's not starting in the game. Justin Fields is starting in the game, which honestly, their offense is going to look the same either way, because they're basically the same quarterback, just one's younger than the other one. But
Mike, I gotta say, with Russ though, I can understand. We've always been we like Russ. We're almost Russ apologists to a point.
he's on
during
the
his
team.
time here, and now that he's not on the team anymore, and you're seeing his antics, I get it now. I get why he just annoys the general population. The guy was not going to play. He was inactive, and he was in full uniform with eye black on the sideline.
Which
he was the emergency third quarterback, though.
Come on. There was no chance he was going to. But it's just I'm a team player, guys.
Mike.
It's just
well, and that's one of the things I was going to say. Russell, I really wanted Denver to get 7 sacks on Russell Wilson. Just lay him out the entire game, but we don't get that chance. But looking at the game itself, you have to think. So the Steelers have a very, very strong defense. I think we saw that in their game this weekend against the Falcons. Made Kirk Cousins look horrible. And some of that was probably on Kirk Cousins. But TJ Watt is a game wrecker. That guy is in the quarterback's face all the time. However, Denver's defense, I was rather surprised with as well in our game. I think they're going to play well. And I think that our offense is better than the Steelers' offense. So we'll be able to get more traction offensively than the Steelers will against the Broncos defense.
The other thing that, that was not really focused on, if you will, from the Broncos side, specifically when it came to the quarterback position, because it was all centered on, Russell Wilson and, their revenge game. Well, they won the game. The Broncos did. But I will guarantee, I'm talking about the Broncos and Bears last year.
Oh,
the Broncos won. But I can guarantee you, Justin Fields will not have an efficient first half like he did, against the Broncos in that game. He will not have that this go around. The Broncos will play a much more physical brand of football. They will be in Justin Fields' face, and if there was one thing that certainly showed up was he doesn't use the middle of the field. Shocker. I mean, like, I just think that, like, I just think that for this game, from the Pittsburgh side of things, they have to be able to use the middle of the field. And I think that, for them, like, their weapons are disgusting. Like, except for Pat Frymuth and George Pickens, they don't have anyone. And granted, we don't have hardly anyone either, but I would venture to guess that Sean is going to have a little bit of a better game plan, right? Because it's, he's not going to have terrible. He's not a Hackett, ladies and gentlemen. Like, he's a vet coach for a reason. So I eventually he's going to be calling a much better game plan. And I think that Vance is actually going to play a little bit pissed off, knowing the fact that Justin Fields is starting. So we talk so much about a revenge game, against Russ, but I guarantee you this thing's been kind of circled regardless, who's starting. And so Justin Fields, shredding his defense up, back in Chicago. Yeah, this game's going to mean a lot to Vance.
So there's one aspect of this game coming up that and the previous game that we didn't bring up that was a huge part of why the Broncos were close in the game against the Seahawks that I think is going to be outstanding against the Steelers and is going to help us win this game. Special teams. We haven't mentioned special teams in a positive light in like 8 years.
Yeah.
Our special teams led to 2 safeties.
Yeah.
Spectacular. Yeah.
You know what they say? Special teams, special plays, special players.
It's the Mike Westhoff effect, baby.
Special teams.
But you look at the Steelers coming in 1-0. They won 18-10, but those 18 points were 6 field goals. They did not score an offensive touchdown at all. So they're not coming in here with a ton of momentum. We're going to steamroll over the Broncos. I mean, Chris Boswell had a great game. So this is certainly very, very winnable. And I'm not trying to gloss over the special teams. I mean that Tremont Smith bat back and that was caught at the 1 yard line was just. I mean, it was beautiful. And the fact that the NFL was tweeting it out and national accounts were tweeting it out was pretty cool.
And that's why Tremont Smith's on this team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the Steelers Falcons game. The Falcons defense did not look that great. Like there wasn't the defense. Adding Justin Simmons, it wasn't the defense that everyone was like, all hyped up because the defense is going to look good. They were okay, but I wouldn't say that the Falcons defense played that well. The Steelers just have no options.
Yeah. Frankly, it was more about how disappointing the Falcons were offensively, more than anything. I thought defensively the Falcons were okay. It had more to do with their offense specifically for the Falcons. But
I don't think Kirk's healthy.
Yeah.
You don't think so?
I do not think Kirk is healthy at all. Aaron Rodgers you can tell he's healthy. Kirk, no.
Huh.
I mean, but Kirk's injury happened 7 or 8 weeks after Rodgers, so he had a 2-month head start on the recovery too.
Yeah, and Rodgers did that speed bridge. Kirk did the traditional Achilles surgery that takes several months to come back from. So yeah, man, you could tell, but obviously this is not a Falcons-centered podcast. But when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think that defensively for Denver, there's really almost 2 calls that you're going to make all game. On first down, it's going to be single high man with a loaded box. Second down, you're probably going to call cover 2 man contain because you're not worried about Justin Fields attacking the middle of the field and burning you on a dig route or a post route or anything like that. Because you look at his quarterback heat map, the middle of the field is wide open. There is no passes attempted in the middle of the field. It's all outside the numbers. So I think that's going to be your second down plan. And then third down, light them the fuck up.
Yeah.
Jeff's going to be in the house, so he unfortunately won't see the Russ redemption game, but he's certainly going to see a lively home opener.
Yeah. So let's go with Broncos and Steelers predictions.
So I actually will continue the theme of what I had with our season prediction. Even though I did have a W with Seattle, I think this is a W. I think they come away with a W, and I actually think that they will play a little bit more physical brand of football. And I think that the trend of 20 or more points continues. I think that they actually score, over 20 points, and I think that they actually win handily. I think they win handily. I think they actually win 24-13.
Oh my gosh, that was my pick. All right, 27-13 Broncos.
So I think I already talked about offensively how the Steelers offense is going to match up. But on the other side of the ball, I think that Denver is going to be able to really get their stride on offense because, yes, the Steelers have better personnel on defense than the Seahawks do, but with their defensive scheme, you kind of know what you're going to get from them pre-snap. They don't really disguise a whole lot. They're not as confusing up front at the line of scrimmage. It's more about fundamentals and just winning up front with guys like Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith. I feel like Bo is going to have less confusion up front just because he's not trying to dissect all these simulated pressures and all these exotic blitzes that Mike McDonald was coming with. So I think that's going to make things easier. Plus, you're not playing in Seattle. There aren't going to be communication issues. Hopefully, Sean Payton leans into the run game more, both from a running back perspective as well as a quarterback perspective. If the Broncos can check all of these boxes, they should take care of business. So I'm going to pick the Broncos to win. I think it's going to be close because Mike Tomlin teams always play hard and play physical. I'm going to pick Denver 24-20.
I'm actually going to go a little lower than that. I'm going to say Broncos 17-12.
Scoregami.
I think the Steelers still are just able to kick field goals, and that's it. So I think it's going to be 17-12.
All pro kicker, Chris Boswell.
All pro kicker. So yeah, anything else that you guys want to cover before we go?
I mean, I just think that maybe one of the reasons why the Broncos might have a little bit better success through the air is I actually think the Broncos secondary is a bit better than the Steelers secondary. So I mean, yeah, it's better because of the pass rush of the Steelers, if you will. But I think that if you're going to kind of nitpick a little bit, and I think if you're going to call it for what it was last week, Patrick Queen looked bad. He looked really bad. So maybe there's a way you can kind of see something there with some of the running backs out of the backfield, and maybe you do. Maybe the reason why they were holding off of Bo was they actually wanted to start showing some more of him running the ball at home for the fans. Maybe that's something that they were, thinking. I don't know. That's just,
or maybe exploit this matchup with the weakened linebacking core of the Steelers.
Yeah.
Right. Fair.
All right. So that is going to about do it for us. We all have the Broncos winning the game against the Steelers. It's going to be an exciting game. Again, disappointed that we don't get to smack around Mr. Limited, but that's okay. I'll take the win anyways. Make sure you check out all the other shows on the MHRT network. We got shows Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Neighborhood on game days. Also, make sure you check out Broncos Syndicate with Gage Madrid, mainly Broncos, which is on the network on Wednesday nights. So make sure you check that out. We love the Broncos. We love Broncos country. I'm so excited the football is back, but it's time to go. We'll see you guys later. Peace.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast's racking up the flame out.